All I did was put a $2 pink flamingo in my yard, and 3 days later, I was facing $7,000 in HOA fines and death threats from a woman named Karen Wilkins. That's how it started, just a cheap plastic bird from the dollar store. I stuck it in the front yard because I thought it looked funny. My house was new, my lawn was plain, and I figured, why not add a bit of personality? But apparently, personality was a crime in Oak Hills. On the first day, I got a friendly note taped to my door. The paper was pink and smelled like lavender, as if the scent could hide the threat inside. Dear homeowner, it read, decorative yard items must be pre-approved by the HOA Aesthetic Committee. Please remove the unauthorized ornament within 24 hours to avoid fines. Sincerely, Karen Wilkins, HOA President. I actually laughed. I thought it was a prank. But no, it wasn't. I'd soon learn Karen didn't joke, ever. By day 2, I got another letter. This time, the envelope had official HOA branding on it. Inside was a bill for $250 and a copy of the neighborhood aesthetic standards, which included phrases like, no whimsical decorations, and color schemes must reflect earth tone dignity. Apparently, hot pink flamingos were the enemy of earth tone dignity. So, I did what any rational person would do. I left the flamingo exactly where it was and gave it a name, Maurice. Maurice stood proud. That night, I noticed a woman standing across the street, arms crossed, staring at my lawn like she was trying to burn it with her eyes. Shoulder-length blonde hair, big sunglasses, wine glass in hand. Even though it was 8:30 p.m. I waved. She didn't wave back. On the third day, the fines jumped to $1,000 and included extra charges for noncompliance, community disruption, and my favorite, visual assault. That's when I knocked on my neighbor Chuck's door. Chuck was a retired Navy guy who spent most of his time polishing his mailbox and feeding squirrels. Chuck, I said, who the hell is this Karen lady? Chuck laughed so hard, he almost dropped his squirrel peanuts. Son, he said, Karen is the HOA. She is the law. Is that legal? I asked. Chuck shrugged. Legal? Sure. Moral? Not even close. The next morning, I woke up to find Maurice missing. Gone. Vanished. No flamingo, no note. Just an empty patch of grass where he once proudly stood. That was the final straw. I marched over to the HOA office, which was attached to Karen's oversized colonial-style house. The sign on the door said, office hours by appointment only. Emergencies require written requests. I knocked anyway. No one answered. As I turned to leave, I noticed something shiny poking out from the side hedge. I pushed the branches back, and there was Maurice, dirty, bent, stuffed behind the bushes like evidence in a bad crime show. I took pictures. Then I knocked again, harder this time. The door opened with a dramatic creak, and there she was, Karen Wilkins in all her glory. Silk robe, pearl necklace, and an expression like she'd smelled something foul the moment she laid eyes on me. Can I help you? She asked, voice dripping with fake sweetness. You took my flamingo. She blinked. I have no idea what you're talking about. I found it in your bushes. That's not proof. I have pictures. Still not proof. I swear she was smiling. The kind of smug smile that only people with laminated binders and clipboards can pull off. I'll report this, I said. To whom? She asked, eyebrows raised. I am the HOA. And that's when it hit me. This woman really thought she was untouchable, like a dictator ruling a 5-block kingdom of scared retirees and overpriced lawn ornaments. That night, I installed a security camera facing my yard, just in case. The next morning, I got a fine for unauthorized surveillance equipment. That's right, Karen fined me for the camera. She also sent a warning that if I didn't remove all unsanctioned accessories from my lawn, porch, windows, and mailbox, I'd face legal action. The new total, $7,000. I stared at the paper in disbelief. And then, at the bottom of the letter, in actual Comic Sans font, she had typed, "This is your final warning. Compliance ensures community harmony." It wasn't even about the flamingo anymore. It was about power. She wanted control, total obedience, and I was the first person to push back. So, I pushed harder. I reinstalled Maurice with a friend, a second flamingo. Then I added a lawn gnome flipping the bird. Then Christmas lights in April. Karen responded with fury, daily fines, photos of my yard taped to my door with handwritten notes like unacceptable and an insult to the community. But then something interesting happened. One night, around 2:17 a.m., my camera caught movement. I reviewed the footage and nearly dropped my phone. There she was, Karen herself, hooded, gloved, sneaking into my yard with a flashlight and a tape measure. She pulled out a notebook, scribbled something down, and then, get this, stole the second flamingo, Maria. Maurice was left unharmed, his friend kidnapped. I had her on video now. I had proof, real proof. She wasn't just a tyrant. She was trespassing, stealing, possibly committing a felony. I didn't know it yet, but that footage would become the first piece in a plan much bigger than revenge. I wasn't going to just fight back. I was going to take her down, and I'd use her own rulebook to do it. I didn't go straight to the cops with the footage. See, I could have. That video of Karen sneaking into my yard at 2:17 a.m. with her tape measure and notebook, stealing one flamingo and leaving the other like a warning, it was solid gold. Trespassing, theft, intimidation, it was all there. But Karen had something better than lawyers on her side: control, power, fear. Everyone in Oak Hills either owed her, feared her, or owed someone who feared her. So, instead of kicking down doors, I went quiet, strategic. I started by joining the HOA Facebook group. It was private, obviously, required approval. I applied with a profile picture of my dog wearing sunglasses and a caption that said, "Just a neighbor trying to blend in." For some reason, that worked. Karen approved me within 5 minutes. The posts inside were exactly what you'd expect. People arguing over hedge height. A heated debate about whether garden gnomes could be art. One guy named Bruce complaining that someone's Halloween skeleton had been left out until January. And then there were Karen's posts, daily updates about acceptable lawn colors and community cohesion standards. A long post banning inflatable pool toys unless they were tastefully muted in color. She even uploaded an HOA violation report leaderboard, like a video game scoreboard. Guess who was in first place? Yours truly. I had 27 infractions. But something in the comments caught my eye. A woman named Dana wrote under Karen's post, "I never even got a warning, just a $400 fine for a decorative rock in my flower bed. What kind of neighborhood is this?" Bingo. I messaged her privately. Dana turned out to be a gold mine. She'd lived in the neighborhood for 4 years, used to be on the HOA board until she voted against Karen on a small issue, whether or not solar panels should be allowed. Karen said they were too futuristic. Dana told me after that, Dana's life became hell. Fines, anonymous complaints, a denied request to build a deck. Karen had slowly pushed her out, made her look like a troublemaker, and eventually forced her to resign. Sound familiar? I asked. Dana said she might have something better when I asked if she still had access to anything. Old emails, meeting minutes, anything useful. 2 days later, I met her at a coffee shop downtown. She slid a flash drive across the table like we were in a spy movie. "I found this in my email backups," she whispered. "It's the original HOA documentation, before Karen rewrote it all." I plugged it into my laptop that night, and what I found made my jaw drop. First of all, the HOA bylaws Karen had been quoting in her letters were mostly fake. She'd edited the document, added rules, deleted others, and changed the formatting to look official. The original file didn't have anything about lawn decorations, mailbox colors, or surveillance equipment. Second, there were folders labeled compliance reports, filled with photos, hundreds of them. Karen had been personally photographing people's homes, printing them out, and writing her own violation reports, all filed under her initials, KW. Then came the kicker, a folder called Board Business. Inside, scanned documents revealed Karen had forged at least 3 board member signatures on policy decisions. One file showed a unanimous vote to increase HOA dues, but Dana told me the vote never happened. The date on the document matched the week Karen had hosted a virtual meeting, which, according to 2 ex-board members, never actually took place. So now I had proof of trespassing, evidence of fake fines, forged documents, and a woman with a god complex playing dictator in a suburb of 80 houses. But I needed more. I needed to see what she wasn't sharing online, what secrets she kept locked away in that HOA office attached to her house. So, I came up with a plan. The next HOA meeting was posted online, Thursday at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. Public, but mostly empty. People didn't show up unless they had a direct complaint, and most were too afraid to speak up anyway. I showed up early, wore khakis, polished shoes, brought cookies. New neighbor, trying to be helpful, I said to the woman at the front door. She smiled and let me in. Karen wasn't there yet. The room was set up like a press conference, with a long table at the front and foldable chairs facing it. I slid into the back row and waited. 5 minutes before start time, Karen walked in like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, perfect hair, pearl earrings catching the overhead lights. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome, neighbors," she said. "Let's keep tonight brief. No outbursts, no interruptions, and no freeloading off community goodwill." No one laughed. They never did. She started droning on about irrigation updates and mailbox painting initiatives. I slipped out the back. I didn't go home. I crossed the street to Karen's house, staying low, ducking behind hedges. Her HOA office had a separate entrance, an unlocked window, and no security system, just a fake sticker that said 24/7 surveillance. Inside, it was like stepping into a Bond villain's lair, if the villain specialized in code violations. Binders, filing cabinets, a corkboard with pictures of various houses, including mine, with red string connecting problem zones. A whiteboard with names and rankings. I was labeled Flamingo Guy, escalating threat. I pulled out my phone and started snapping photos, dozens of them. Then I saw the safe. It was small, hidden behind a fake, "Welcome Home" plaque on the wall. I couldn't open it, obviously, but next to it was a folder labeled Emergency Only. Curious, I opened it. Inside, a printed document titled Contingency Plan, Legal/Meteor Attack. It was filled with talking points, excuses, and strategies for denying all wrongdoing if ever accused. She'd planned everything, and she knew her reign couldn't last forever. I slipped out just as the meeting ended and Karen's car pulled into the driveway. My heart pounded in my ears the whole way home. That night, I backed everything up, double, triple. I sent copies to Dana, my cousin who's a paralegal, and a Gmail account I hadn't touched since 2014. I wasn't going to get caught. Not yet. Not before I burned her empire down. And this time, I'd be the one lighting the match. The sky was unusually quiet the night my house caught fire. No wind, no rustling trees, just a thick, uncomfortable silence, like the universe itself was holding its breath. It had been a week since I broke into Karen's little HOA dungeon. I'd kept my head down since then. No flamingos, no lawn ornaments, no passive-aggressive signs on the window. I wanted her to think I'd surrendered, that I was another broken resident worn down by the endless fines and HOA tyranny. But behind the scenes, I was building something quietly, collecting witness statements from neighbors she'd threatened, pulling city zoning records she'd manipulated, preparing to file an official complaint with the state HOA regulatory board. I even had a nickname for the operation, Code Red. And then, boom. Not a literal explosion, but the emotional kind that drops your heart into your stomach. It was 3:12 a.m. when the smoke alarm went off. At first, I thought it was a malfunction. You know how smoke detectors love to cry wolf at 3 a.m. just to flex their authority. But this time, it wasn't a false alarm. I stepped into the hallway and smelled it instantly. Smoke, thick, acrid, burning plastic, and wood kind of smoke. I ran downstairs, barefoot, coughing before I even hit the living room. The entire kitchen wall was glowing orange behind the windows. The back porch was fully ablaze. I grabbed the fire extinguisher, which laughed at me and died in one short puff. By the time I got outside, half the house was lit up. I ran to the neighbors, banged on the door, and called 911. The fire trucks arrived in 6 minutes, but by then, my kitchen, dining room, and most of the living room were toast, literal flaming toast. I sat on the curb in shock, barefoot, smoke in my lungs, eyes watering not just from the fire but from rage. Then I saw her, Karen, standing across the street in a robe and slippers, holding a mug. Not a coffee mug, a wine mug. She took a sip, tilted her head like she was admiring a masterpiece, and said something to the man beside her. He laughed, and I snapped. I stood up and marched toward her. My legs were shaking. My voice cracked when I yelled, "What are you smiling at?" Karen's face changed in a flash. Shock, then concern, then her trademark smug pity. "Oh my," she said. "That's so unfortunate. Fires are such a hazard. Did you ever submit that fire pit request form?" I couldn't believe it. My house was still burning, and she was already playing the unauthorized structure card. I clenched my fists. This wasn't a fire pit. "No," she said, mock surprise on her face. "Well, maybe the security cameras will tell us more." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I remembered what I had on her. The files, the photos, the contingency plan. The cops arrived about 10 minutes later. One officer stayed with the fire marshal. The other came to speak with me. His name was Officer Patel, calm, professional, asked all the right questions. But when I mentioned Karen, his demeanor changed. "She's the HOA president, right?" he said, jotting something down. "Yeah." He nodded slowly, like he'd heard her name before in other conversations he couldn't talk about. I showed him the footage from my security camera, the one Karen had fined me for installing. Most of it was wiped clean, gone, like someone had jammed the feed or erased the file. But one small clip had survived. It showed a shadow moving behind my garage around 2:48 a.m. The figure had a flashlight. I paused it, zoomed in. It wasn't clear, but the body language, the stance, the height, it looked just like her. Officer Patel watched it twice, then sighed. "It's not conclusive," he said, "but it's something." He promised to include it in the report. The fire marshal came over later and said the initial cause looked electrical, but something about the pattern seemed off. "Back porch?" I asked. "The wiring out there is all new. I just redid it." He looked at me. "You'd be surprised what bad intentions can make look accidental." The next day, I went back to what was left of the house. The air was thick with ash. My kitchen was gone, living room charcoal. The pink flamingo, Maurice, melted into a blob of sad plastic near the front steps. Insurance said it would take weeks to process the claim, maybe months. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was radioactive. Karen had crossed the line. She destroyed everything and smirked while doing it. But the fire had lit something inside me too. No more slow plays, no more waiting. It was time to go nuclear. I called Dana, told her everything, sent her the footage, the report, and the backup files. She called 3 more ex-board members, and together we formed what we jokingly called the neighborhood resistance. By the weekend, I'd rented a cheap Airbnb just outside the neighborhood, slept on an inflatable mattress, ate microwave burritos, but every hour, I worked. We combed through the HOA bylaws, the real ones, the ones Karen had illegally altered. I highlighted every clause she'd broken, every signature she'd faked, every meeting she'd held without proper notice. Then, on page 17, section 8.2, I found it. Any sitting president may be removed by written petition of 60% of active homeowners or by board vote following evidence of misconduct, provided a formal complaint is filed. That was it, my golden ticket. If I could gather enough signatures or pressure the board with the evidence, I could legally take her down. But I didn't want to just remove her. I wanted to bury her empire, to make sure she never ruled another block of concrete again. So, I made copies of everything, photos, emails, the contingency plan, and I started drafting a complaint, a real one, not to the HOA board, but to the State Department of Neighborhood and Community Affairs. This wasn't just about lawn decorations anymore. It was about war. And Karen had just lit the first match. She had no idea I was coming with gasoline. If Karen thought burning down my house would scare me off, she clearly hadn't read her own rule book closely enough. Because nestled in the middle of that overly complicated HOA handbook, between guidelines on shrub symmetry and approved shades of beige, was the clause she'd forgotten existed, section 8.2. The president may be removed by a board vote or a petition signed by 60% of homeowners, provided there's evidence of misconduct. Guess what? I had evidence, motive, witnesses, even a few disgruntled former board members who were practically foaming at the mouth for revenge. The day after discovering the clause, I called Dana and told her to gather the others. We met in her garage, surrounded by paint cans, dusty holiday decorations, and a gnome army she wasn't legally allowed to display thanks to Karen's no mystical figures policy. "We can pull this off," I said. "We just need signatures and support." Chuck, the retired Navy guy, cracked his knuckles. "I've been waiting for this since she fined me for not power washing my driveway." Dana opened her laptop. "Let's start with the list of known victims." We made a spreadsheet of every homeowner we knew had been fined, harassed, or blackmailed. We cross-referenced that with the files from Karen's office. And just like that, a pattern emerged. The same names, over and over. More than half the neighborhood had been targeted at some point. We split up into teams and started visiting houses. Friendly conversations, soft pitches, no pressure, just, "Hey, have you ever had a weird experience with Karen?" The responses were overwhelming. One woman told us Karen once fined her $200 because her kid's bike was visible from the street. Another man, Greg, had a dog named Pickles that barked too much, according to Karen, so she reported him for unauthorized pet sounds, whatever that means. By the end of the week, we had 37 signatures out of 64 homes in the HOA. We needed at least 39, 2 to go. But we hit a snag. The last holdouts were a couple named Lynn and Judith, staunch Karen loyalists who actually believed in her HOA gospel. Their lawn looked like a showroom, and rumor had it Karen once called them her model citizens. We needed a miracle. Turns out, We didn't need a miracle, just a drone. Chuck had one, a high-resolution quadcopter with night vision and a tiny camera. He used it for birdwatching, or so he claimed. I bet even Judith's got something Karen overlooked. Chuck grinned. So, we sent the drone up. 30 minutes later, we had the footage, an unapproved gazebo in their backyard. Not on record, no permit, and definitely not in the HOA design palette. Dana nearly cried from laughter. The Queen's favorite pawns are violators too. We didn't blackmail them, just casually mentioned the footage and offered to help them file for retroactive approval if they supported the petition. Judith signed reluctantly. Len followed with a dramatic sigh. That was 39. But I wasn't done. The petition was solid, but I wanted to bury Karen so deep in paperwork that her next address would be under a pile of legal fees. So, I prepared for the board vote too, and for that, I needed to flip the HOA board members she still had under her thumb. There were 5. Dana used to be one, but had stepped down. One had recently moved. Another was Karen's cousin, useless. The last 2, Henry and Mala, quiet, reserved, and rarely showed up to meetings unless Karen ordered them to. I invited them to coffee. Henry came, Mala didn't. I showed him the evidence, just a small taste. The doctored signatures, the fake violations, the file labeled Emergency Contingency Plan. Henry looked like he'd seen a ghost. She told us everything was reviewed by legal, he whispered. Does this look reviewed to you? I said, sliding him a copy of a violation notice she sent to someone for having wind chimes. He shook his head. I didn't sign up for this. Mala was harder. She didn't answer calls or emails. So, I waited outside her house, not in a creepy way, just leaning on my car, holding a coffee cup, looking tired and burnt out, which honestly, I was. She opened her garage and gave me a look. If you're here to complain about Karen, save it. She does what needs to be done. I didn't argue. I just held out a photo. Karen's corkboard with everyone's names and red string pointing to violators. Mala's name was on there, circled twice. Mala stared. She's keeping files on everyone, I said. Even the loyal ones. Mala took the photo, didn't say anything, just walked back inside. 2 days later, she emailed me one sentence. You have my vote. Game on. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the clubhouse. Same setup, same chairs, but this time, people showed up. A lot of people. Karen arrived late, which was unusual for her. She looked thrown off, probably heard the rumblings. She walked in with her clipboard and fake pearls, trying to act like the queen bee, but her eyes scanned the room fast, too fast. She knew something was wrong. She opened with her usual routine. Let's begin with last month's violations. I stood up. Point of order, I said, waving a folder. Karen sighed. You're not on the board. Actually, said Dana, standing beside me. He doesn't need to be. He has filed a formal misconduct complaint per section 8.2. Whispers rippled through the room. Karen froze. That clause was removed 2 years ago. No, I said, holding up a printout. You removed it illegally. According to this original version, verified by 2 former board members and 3 homeowners, you can be removed tonight. More whispers. Someone actually clapped. I think it was Chuck. Karen's mouth opened, closed, then twisted into that trademark smirk. This is absurd. Fabricated nonsense by a disgruntled tenant. I'm a homeowner, I said, and I've got witnesses, evidence, a petition signed by 60% of the neighborhood. I dropped the stack of papers on the table. And unless you'd like to dispute this with the State Department of Neighborhood Affairs, I suggest we vote. Karen's confidence cracked. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept up the facade. Fine, she said. Let's vote. One by one, the board members stood. Henry, aye. Mala, aye. Dana, aye. Even Karen's cousin paused, then said, aye. Karen's face turned pale. The motion passed. She was done. Just like that, Karen Wilkins was removed as HOA president. She stormed out, but not before knocking over the cookie tray someone had brought. The silence she left behind was louder than any of her speeches. The crowd stayed for another hour. People talked, laughed, some even hugged. I stayed until the end, then walked outside into the cool night air. But I wasn't smiling. Not yet. Because the job wasn't done. The house was still gone, and Karen hadn't faced justice. Not real justice. It was poetic, really. The woman who once fined a neighbor for having overly aggressive garden lighting had just been removed by her own rules in front of the very people she used to intimidate. Karen Wilkins, former queen of Oak Hills, had been dethroned. But I wasn't satisfied. Karen wasn't just a tyrant. She wasn't just a paper-pushing control freak. She was a criminal. My house had burned down, And though the fire marshal's report still read inconclusive, we both knew who had the most motive, opportunity, and track record of petty revenge escalated to the extreme. The evidence so far, circumstantial. The camera footage too blurry, the timing suspicious, but not enough to nail her. What I needed now was the smoking gun, or in this case, the matchbook. So, I turned to the one person who knew Karen better than anyone, her ex-best friend, Trisha. I met Trisha once at a block party back when I first moved in. She and Karen used to rule the HOA together like a suburban mafia duo. Matching visors, matching clipboards, matching disdain for inflatable pool toys. But about a year ago, they had a dramatic falling out over something trivial. Rumor had it Trisha voted to allow pastel mailbox flags. Karen saw that as high treason. When I reached out, Trisha was more than happy to talk. "Karen? Dangerous," she said bluntly, sipping sweet tea on her porch. She's always been obsessed with control, but after the board gave her full access to the HOA emergency funds, she changed. Emergency funds? My ears perked up. What funds? Trisha leaned closer. There's a private slush fund, supposed to be for emergencies, natural disasters, infrastructure fixes. Karen called it the rainy day vault. Only the president has access. And how much is in it? Last I saw? About 40 grand. That was the twist I didn't see coming. Karen had motivation beyond pride. Burning down my house could trigger insurance payouts, force me to leave, or even justify emergency repair initiatives that gave her access to those funds. And if she touched that money, misused it, we'd have her for real. I needed proof. Dana helped me file a public records request for HOA financials under the new interim president, Chuck. Naturally, we had access to everything. Receipts, transactions, budget memos. 2 hours into combing through spreadsheets, Dana found it. A withdrawal of $3,500 from the rainy day vault, dated the morning after my house fire, labeled Security Review/Fire Response. But it wasn't paid to the fire department or a contractor. It was paid to Karen's nephew, who, as it turns out, runs a private security consultation company that's really just him and a drone. This was it. We had motive, timeline, financial records, and Trisha was ready to testify. So we did the one thing Karen never expected. We turned her own HOA handbook into an exhibit. Chuck and I compiled a formal complaint, this time addressed to the county attorney's office. We included video footage from the night of the fire, financial misuse records, testimony from multiple residents, the drone footage of her trespassing weeks before the fire, a signed affidavit from Trisha. We dropped the folder off ourselves. Chuck even wore a tie. Then we waited. 3 days later, Karen was arrested. Not for arson, not yet, but for embezzlement and fraudulent misuse of HOA funds. They brought her out in handcuffs from her perfectly symmetrical house in broad daylight as half the neighborhood watched. Her pearls were missing, her visor was gone, and for the first time since I moved in, Karen was silent. It was over. Almost. Because as satisfying as it was to see her get cuffed, my house was still ashes. Insurance was finally kicking in, thanks to the push from the fire marshal who'd reopened the investigation after our evidence. But I didn't want to rebuild in fear. I didn't want to live wondering when the next Karen would show up. So, I ran for HOA president. People thought I was joking at first. Me? The guy with the flamingo war? The lawn gnome sympathizer? But I ran on one simple platform, yard freedom. No fines for pink. I won unanimously. In my first week as president, I eliminated 27 unnecessary HOA bylaws, banned anonymous complaints, and capped fines at $50. I even passed the Maurice Clause, protecting the right to tasteful lawn decor regardless of color, species, or whimsy level. The neighborhood changed. People started waving again. Lawn chairs came out. Decorations popped up. There was even a house that put up a 10-foot inflatable cat dressed like a pirate. No one cared. We were free. The day construction on my new house finished, I stood in the yard holding a box. Inside was a single, slightly melted, slightly bent plastic flamingo, Maurice. I stuck him into the grass right where he used to stand. And then I added his new buddy, a bright blue flamingo I named Liberty. As I stepped back to admire them, Chuck walked over with a beer. "You really did it," he said. "Took down Karen, rebuilt the house, became president." I nodded. "Not bad for a guy with a bird problem." He chuckled. "What's next?" I smiled. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. There'd be another fight someday, another neighbor, another Karen, maybe. But this time, we'd be ready. And this time, the HOA president was on our side. Karen may have lit the fire, but I wrote the rule book that rose from the ashes. And Maurice? He's still standing.